specialized intensive treatment center that specializes in anxiety disorders and obsessive-compulsive disorder. OCD, it's something that you've probably heard a lot about. Maybe it's a term you've heard used frequently, but I would question if it's a term that you've heard used correctly. Oftentimes, OCD is stigmatized and it's misdiagnosed for many reasons. One of the top, in my opinion, being that society thinks of OCD in ways that really further increase the stigma that surrounds the diagnosis. OCD, we think of somebody who's a neat freak or somebody who likes their items arranged a certain way, but OCD is so much more. It is one of the most prevalent mental health conditions globally. It impacts about 2 to 3% of individuals across the world. It doesn't discriminate, so OCD affects all of us across the board. But what we see is that access to effective evidence-based treatment does discriminate. And there's many years that exist from the time a person starts to experience symptoms until they receive a proper diagnosis. These are thoughts that we don't like, we don't enjoy, and that we get no pleasure out of. In fact, the thoughts are also accompanied by anxiety and distress. How can they get rid of these thoughts? How can they get rid of the anxiety and distress that accompanies these thoughts? And that's where the compulsions come in. The compulsions are repetitive behaviors that are done in an effort to alleviate that anxiety and the distress that the thoughts have caused. This is often where individuals have unwanted intrusive thoughts that they have become contaminated or that an item or object is contaminated. And the repetitive behaviors or compulsions are activities like hand washing and cleaning excessively, washing their clothes, whatever it might be. The second piece that's really important when we think about OCD and how it presents is the role that avoidance can play. Somebody with severe OCD could actually engage in minimal rituals in a day, but maybe they're avoiding the world, right? Maybe they are not engaging in activities that they used to engage in. They're no longer seeing family members or friends because of their OCD and the distress it would cause them if they interact with those folks. The good news is that despite the prevalence and despite the disabling nature of the illness, there is amazing effective treatment. The specific behavioral therapy that we do is called exposure with response prevention, also known as ERP. It's a specific form of cognitive behavioral therapy, and the concept is kind of exactly what it sounds like. We slowly and systematically expose individuals to the things that are triggering, distressing for them, and we engage in response prevention, so we prevent them from doing that ritual. Now, when we're talking about trauma and all sorts of different diagnoses, trauma, social exposure therapy is very common, and maybe you've heard of that as a type of treatment that people often do for CBT. It's important that we know for OCD it's not exposure therapy alone, it's exposure with response prevention. So I'll explain that briefly, but imagine if my doorknob is contaminated. Well, in office, I have to touch the doorknob, so I have to do an exposure. So that's great, right? I do an exposure, I touch the doorknob, I go to leave my office. However, if I walk straight across my hall to the bathroom and wash my hands, I did the exposure, but I've actually done a behavior now that has reinforced my illness, right? It has told my OCD that I should be scared, that the doorknob is dangerous, and that I need to do something to get rid of that feeling. Exposure with response prevention is that we do the exposure, we touch the doorknob, and we prevent the response that we normally would do, so we don't engage in that hand wash. What that means is that we sit with the distress, we sit with the discomfort, we sit with the feeling that I'm contaminated, something might happen, that this doesn't feel right, but eventually what we call habituate, right? Eventually, if we don't do that behavior, our anxiety will subside, and we will teach ourselves, we'll teach our brain, and we'll teach our OCD that we don't have to engage in behaviors to feel better, and that we can actually live our life without doing rituals and still eventually feel the same relief or that someone without OCD feels when we have these intrusive thoughts. The message is a message of hope. It's a message that you can have severe OCD, you can have a severe level of functioning, yet you can live an amazing life. And what we mean by that is that you don't have to have that severe level of functioning forever, right? But you can have or be experiencing a severe level of functioning, and with the appropriate treatment, you can learn to manage your symptoms so that you can have that amazing, successful life.
How are you doing today? My name is David Sincere, and I am the pastor of Fort Bend Transformation Church and the founder of Advocacy Now Institute. We are here to talk to you today about mental health and mental illness, especially within the African American community. Mental health is a disease that impacts all communities, and it impacts communities differently. And so I'm here today to talk about how it impacts the African American community. You know, one of the things that we all deal with in different areas in our lives is stigma. And mental health is one of those areas that many families deal with also in terms of the stigma. And that is something that is also prevalent in the African American community when it comes to mental health and mental illness. And, you know, one of the reasons why we are doing this documentary is to let you know that it's okay to talk to someone. You know, I've had individuals in my family that suffered from mental health and mental illness problems. And so it's important that we were able to validate one another when it comes to mental health and mental illness. Some of you may have parents that are dealing with mental health issues. Some of you may have children that's dealing with mental health issues. You may have family members and you just don't know how to deal with it. You don't know how to address it. You don't know who to talk to. But we're trying to have this advocacy campaign, this documentary, so that we can help you with that. You can talk to pastors and you can talk to mental health professionals, counselors and therapists. There's social workers out there that you can talk to. It's important that you talk to somebody that you can trust with confidentiality on this issue. There are individuals out there that are veterans within the African American community. They're dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. And there's a lot of different, a confluence of different signs and symptoms that they're dealing with that maybe the family, they just don't understand. And so us educating ourselves with our veterans and our loved ones and our children, our families, in terms of what mental illness is all about. Some of you may have individuals in your family within the African American community that's dealing with bipolar disorder. Some of you may be dealing with individuals in your family. They're suffering from anxiety. Some of us have struggled during the pandemic in the African American community. And, you know, we've lost our jobs and we're dealing with adjustment disorder, right? It's been so much change in a short time and our lives have been disrupted. But it's okay. It's just a moment in time. And this is where, you know, we don't give up. We hold on. We keep the faith. And we go talk to someone. And we learn how to travel this road called life in this journey together. That's what's important. My grandmother, she passed away at 88 years old. And in the final days of her life, she suffered from dementia. And we had to help her out. And my grandmother was a proud woman. And in the beginning, she just didn't want people to know what was going on. But over time, she learned that it's okay to talk about it. Because she realized that if she talked to her therapist and she talked about that, then maybe she would be able to encourage other people that it's okay to talk to a therapist. And as her primary caretaker, I learned from her. And we can learn from each other. And so as this disease that impacts so many different people, 1 out of every 5 individuals could be diagnosed with the mental health issue before the age of 18. Right, even within our African American community. It's okay to say that it's okay and to talk to someone. And so I'm David Lee Sincere Jr., pastor of Fort Bend Transformation Church and the founder of Advocacy Now. Here today, standing with you. We're going to stand together. And when it's all said and done, at the end of the day, if we can stand together in love, caring for one another, loving one another, helping each other, then we can be assured that we serve a God that's going to help us all be okay. One of the things that we advocate for as part of our mission here in Fort Bend, Texas, is to work with young people. Work with young people as early as possible. Why? Because there are kids out there, young people, that's dealing with early childhood trauma. They're dealing with ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And many of our young people have not learned, they haven't had the opportunity to learn how to manage their emotions. And so that's something that we also advocate for is kids to learn how to manage their emotions in socially emotional learning. And so one of the things that I experienced working with kids on the school campuses in Fort Bend, Texas, are kids that have emotional outbursts. They're doing things that they shouldn't be doing, aberrant behavior. But one of the things that I've learned is when I talk to those kids, I don't just ask them, why did they do that? I ask them, how do they feel? And unfortunately, many of the kids, they tell me that they're sad, they're mad, or they're angry for many different reasons. And so it is extremely important that we reach out to our kids. We make sure that we're dealing with early childhood trauma, that we do several things and take the proper steps to help them. The first thing that we need to do is we need to have awareness. We need to educate ourselves about the struggles that young people go through and be able to identify the signs and the symptoms. The other thing that we need to be able to do is tell someone, the appropriate individuals, and let them know once we see those signs and the symptoms of early childhood trauma, we need to be able to let the proper person know so that we can help them, which is a teacher, a parent, a principal, someone that's going to advocate for the kids. The other thing we need to do is we need to have proper assessment. The kids need to be properly assessed so that they can get the proper diagnosis. And then the next step in the process is to make sure that they get the proper therapy, that they're able to have access to someone that they can talk to. And so it's important because every kid, no matter who they are, and especially within the African American community, no matter, whether they're rich or whether they're poor or whether they're middle class, they need to be in touch with themselves. They need to be comfortable with themselves. They not only need to be academically sound, but they need to be emotionally sound. They need to be able to have a good self-esteem about themselves. And that is not something that just happens by itself. That is something where we have to get involved. We have to get involved. It's something that's a learned behavior to be able to express yourself and to say, I'm hurting, that I don't feel good today. And so this is the advocacy work that we're fighting for, that we're doing to help our babies, our young people, all the way from in the womb until adulthood. And I just believe that if we can do that, if we can take those steps, and that if we can fight for our babies to be emotionally sound as much as we try to fight for them to be academically sound, then we can have a healthy society, in America will be a better place.
Hi, my name is Emma, and my depression story starts at a very young age. I remember when I was 8 years old, I started cutting myself, and I believe it's because I had so much going on in my mind, so much mental pain that I didn't know what to do with. So I started self-harming myself to bring it into physical pain because that's something I could understand. And then later on in school, I was bullied, and in my early adult years, I got into drugs and alcohol and into abusive relationships and was raped. And I just really hated myself. I didn't want to live, and I had multiple suicide attempts, was in and out of the psychiatric hospital. And in 2013, I took a bottle of the prescription drugs I was on with alcohol, and took a blade to my wrist. And I woke up in the ER to a doctor sewing up my arm. And I just remember being very numb to watching that, to him sewing up my arm. And after that, I went to the hospital again for about a week, where they medicated me. And during my stay there, I was angry. I was angry that I was still here. And then from there, I knew that I was here for a reason, and that it wasn't to suffer. So I went to a retreat where there was no Wi-Fi, and I just disconnected for a few days and spent time in nature. And I had this book with me that somebody recommended called The Power of Your Subconscious Mind by Joseph Murphy. And that book was life-changing for me. I started realizing how my thoughts were affecting my mood, and I started implementing affirmations and got into meditation. And from there, I started researching different ways to heal myself, and diet was a huge part of that. I started a plant-based diet about 6 years ago, and I started learning how our gut health affects our mental health. Our serotonin, our happy hormone, is created in our gut. And when we're eating packaged foods and foods with a lot of chemicals, that really messes up our system. And it can affect our mood. It can cause anxiety, depression. So some of the things that I recommend eating, a lot of greens. Like people don't realize how many vegetables and fruits and nuts and seeds there are, because we're so conditioned to just going down the aisle and buying a bag of chips or cereal. There's so much you can do with whole foods. I really love big salads I try to eat the rainbow, so lots of greens and tomatoes and nuts and seeds, healthy fats, avocados, all kinds of fruits. There's just so much out there. It's also really important to move your body and exercise. Our bodies, our cells hold on to traumas and memories. And by exercising and breathing in that fresh oxygen, we're able to release those things. And we're humans, so emotions are going to come up, but it's good to know that it will pass. And there's so many modalities and ways to heal from depression and anxiety and live a happy life. It's also really important to be able to vision a future that excites you. That's something I do every morning before I get out of bed. I close my eyes and I go into my heart space, which the Heart Math Institute talks about. And I think about what I want to create in my life and how I want to feel. And our body listens to our thoughts. And then I go into a state of gratitude for the blessings that I do have.
Hello, my name is Wykeisha McKinney. I am the Zero Suicide Program Manager for the Harris Center for Mental Health and IDD in Houston, Texas. The Harris Center provides mental health services to people in the Harris County area that are low income or no income, underinsured or uninsured. We provide outpatient services like counseling, group services, crisis care. We have a crisis line as well, and in addition to some other support services for those who may be experiencing a mental health crisis. I think what is the beauty of the Harris Center is that we do reach those individuals who may not traditionally reach out for mental health care, and therefore may not feel like healthcare is accessible to them or feel like mental health care is unaffordable for them. We bridge that gap and provide those services and care for individuals who may be dealing with stress, depression, major mental health problems, and don't have usual access to care. With Houston being a very large city and the Harris County area being a very large city, we have 4 clinics in the area in the northwest, northeast, southwest, and southeast parts of Houston. And so very accessible to everyone in the city. And in addition, we have other programs and services like at the Neuropsychiatric Center in downtown and the Medical Center, and even some respite care facilities as well throughout the city. Our programs and services are easily found through our website, www.theharriscenter.org. You can call our crisis line as well, 713-970-7000, and they can even tell you information about our programs and services, or if you're having a crisis in general, they would be able to provide some services and care. So the Harris Center for Mental Health and IDD has 4 locations across the Harris County area, as well as providing services, and we also provide services to adults and children, and we have our youth and child mental health services in 50 co-location areas across the city. So we try our best to be as accessible as we possibly can and meet the needs of our community.
My name is Jennifer Battle. I am the Director of Access at the Harris Center for Mental Health and IDD. IDD means Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. We are located in Harris County, Texas, which is the 4th largest county in the United States. The largest city in our county is Houston, so if that helps gives you some context where we are. So we serve almost 4 million people a year in our population. So we've got a lot of folks that we can work with and who are eligible to receive services in our care. In addition to all of our clinic-based services or outpatient-related services, we also operate a 24-hour crisis line. We are part of a network of crisis lines across the United States. So the work that we do here in Harris County on our crisis line is very similar to the work that crisis lines will do in many other places in the United States. In fact, we're affiliated with the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is a network of almost 200 crisis lines across the United States. So if somebody calls that number, the 1-800-273-TALK, 1-800-273-8255, which is the number to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and if they call from Harris County, then that call is going to be answered in my crisis line. It'll be the same for other counties all across the United States, and those calls will be sent to the counties that are closest to the person that's calling, which is a great thing to happen. So that you'll know that when you call, hopefully your call is being connected to a community worker, a person who knows a little bit about what resources and services might be available near you. But calling a crisis line can feel really scary, especially if it's not something that you've ever done before. So I kind of just wanted to tell you a little bit about what we do at our crisis line, which is pretty similar to what crisis lines do across the country. So the first thing is that most crisis lines are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We know that you can't plan a convenient time to have your crisis. And so we want to make sure that there's somebody that's here and available to talk to you when you need to talk. So that's the first thing. When you call, we'll be here to pick up. The second thing to know is that anybody working at any crisis line typically does that work because they're very empathetic, kind, and caring people. But we also add specific training for folks whenever they come work in a crisis line around how to make sure that the other person on the other end of the line feels cared for and understands that we actually want to hear their story in a non-judgmental way. So what you should hear when you call a crisis line is a lot of empathy, a lot of support, a lot of care, but you shouldn't hear advice or judgment. So once we talk with somebody, we will ask you some questions. We will ask you at some point in our conversation if you're having any thoughts of suicide, which is a really hard question and can feel very scary whenever someone asks you that question. But it's really important for us to talk about because we need to know what type of care you might be interested in. If you're not having any suicidal thoughts, that's fine. We're still happy to talk with you because crisis can look all different kinds of ways. Having a suicidal crisis is only one type of crisis, but we're prepared and ready to handle that if that is the type of support that you need. So we will ask you that question. And we ask that you answer us honestly, which we also know is scary for people because there are some people who've called crisis lines in the past who feel like they've told the person that they are feeling suicidal, and then they feel like the next thing that happens is somebody calls police or calls an ambulance. And that has happened, and I'm sorry if that happened to you and that was not what you were looking for. At my center, we make a conscientious effort to not include any sort of 911 or law enforcement or EMS without really collaboratively coming to that decision with the person that's calling us. And we also know that that's very rare that we would need to do that anyway, because for the most part, when we talk to somebody on the crisis line, we're just providing you a space to vent, to talk about your concerns. Again, we're going to be empathetic, warm, and caring. We may talk to you about what resources that you have available. Do you have any friends or family that you trust? We might ask you questions to see if you have access to any sort of insurance, because then we're asking these questions to help give us an idea about if you want something else, like if you want counseling or if you want to see a therapist, then we can make some decisions about what the best next resource might be for you. But you don't even have to take a resource. Most of the people that call us on the crisis line, they just feel better after talking with somebody for a few minutes just to get some of the heavy stuff off of their chest. Oftentimes putting into words some of the feelings and thoughts that you've been having that you may not have felt comfortable yet or had the words to put together to tell your friends or family. A lot of people tell us that just having the opportunity to talk through it with one of our crisis line counselors gives them the courage and the words and the language that they need to talk to their friends and family. And so oftentimes we'll end the call creating what we might call a safety plan with a person where it says, okay, now that we've talked, what do you want to do next? You mentioned that maybe you want to talk to your mom or your sister or your friend. Do you feel like you're going to be able to do that? When do you think you would be able to do that? Do you want to do that today? Do you want to do that tomorrow? Etc. And so we'll come up with a plan, and then we'll end the call always with an invitation for you to call back if you ever feel like you need additional support or care. Sometimes people are nervous about calling a crisis line because they want to remain anonymous. Remaining anonymous means that you don't tell us your name or any other sort of details about yourself. That is totally okay. You can call us and choose not to tell us your name. That doesn't mean we won't ask you for it, though, because we do want to ask your name because we like to have that conversation and build that rapport so that we can feel a connection. But sometimes people will tell us a name that's not their real name, but a name that they would just like to go by during the call, and that is absolutely okay. There is a difference between being anonymous and then having something be confidential. So you do, in some cases, if somebody would tell us their full name and even tell us their address or what have you, that we would keep that information, but that we don't give that information out publicly to anyone. So any information that we receive from a caller goes into a protected site that we work with only within our program. So no one else has access to that information. With that being said, there's a couple of really important caveats. The times when confidentiality is allowed to be breached is if you are in an active suicidal crisis, meaning that based on what you've told me, I'm really worried that if you don't get help within maybe even the next hour, that you could be at risk of dying from suicide. That you are a minor, and meaning that you're a person that's under the age of 18 and that you've experienced some sort of abuse at the hands of an older person, right? Physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, and that you need help right away. Or that you are a person who is an adult who has a disability, or you're an elderly person who has been abused. So under those circumstances, we do have the responsibility as care providers to assist you. And we can breach that confidentiality in those very limited cases in order to alert protective services of some sort if we feel like you need that immediate care. In my crisis center, if one of our crisis line counselors feels that one of those situations has happened, they are required to talk to a supervisor before they make any immediate decisions about alerting another person to the situation in the call. So there's definitely layers of protection that are built into our service so that we can make sure that we're only breaching that confidentiality when it is absolutely necessary for your safety and care.
Hi, I'm here to tell you a little bit about me and my overall mental health and the value of mental health in the societies that we live in, the places of beauty, and the places where I know I am so thankful to have each and every one of us. See, and I can say that because I was one of those unusual or different people who needed the mental health in my life. See, whenever I explain who I am, I used to err on the side of caution, and I would say anything in defense and protection for myself of who I was, but the truth. I would say that I am a social worker and I've worked with children and families for years. I would introduce myself as a person who loves animals and cats and loves to work with children. I was the first one to tell people that I did some pretty cool things like learn how to drive a motorcycle and all on my own, and that I'm going to be publishing a book all on my own. These are cool things that I was so proud of and continue to be. But the truest part of me that's shaped me into who I am was something that I was very reserved of talking about for a very long time. And that was, and that is, that I was a foster child. And even today, I sometimes give that information in reservation. But I now have this concept and the idea and the support of the fact that having been a kid in foster care in the United States, and particularly in the state of Kansas, I can say that I joyfully and hopefully in the best ways get to represent the estimated 12 million former kids in foster care. It's quite a staggering number. And I get to be one of those voices of those people who have been in foster care in previous years, who have grown up with challenges. Of course, there's that population too that maybe aren't in foster care, but still have a lot of challenging events and traumas happen in their lives that maybe could have been in foster care, or maybe are comparable of the same struggles, because we're all people. And I think I learned that well into my adulthood, that just because particular challenges happened in my life didn't mean I was any greater, worse, or better than anybody else. It just means that life is really tough. And actually, I say it that way a lot, that life is tough, but so are we. I think that expectation that life is going to be easy if, or life can be easy when, is maybe an unrealistic expectation that we have set for ourselves, that we have others set, and maybe the pressure of society and the expectations of items and self-care and mental health and physical health and all of that alone, those standards cannot be realistic. Really, this skill comes, as I've learned through the years and continue to learn, because that's how continued learning is that constant growing process of who we are, is the wholeness of all of those, handling the tough stuff, the social supports, the emotional supports, the psychological, the physical, the spiritual supports of all aspects, and how important they all are working together to make the best versions of ourselves. It took me a long time to even begin to understand part of this concept. And I don't think it's meant to be an easy concept. It's something we have to learn and discover as we grow. And sometimes we think kids are going to get this, especially with the challenges that we face as young children. It's even more difficult to have that hope that things can get better, or that we have resources and people to reach out to if we need. I know when I was the kid in foster care, before I went into foster care, let's just say I had quite a reputation. I wasn't a person most people enjoyed being around. I tended to take things I probably shouldn't. I had been a child that stole and took particularly food and items because I was secluded from the family. And so, under the eyes of those who didn't know what was going on, I was a very troubled child, but they didn't know how to provide for those basic needs, or maybe they were incapable. And so a lot of my behaviors were what people saw. And because of that, I lacked a lot of connections and a lot of supports in my relationships at school, my relationships at home, and in the community. And those were very broken. And I think I've learned how important, how essential and important it is for all of us, no matter what we do or who we are, to have healthy, supportive relationships. We're each worth that. We each deserve that. And I remember even before I went into foster care, that being an impairment that I had was having that trusted person to talk to feel safe with, being the truest form of who I am. And so when I went into foster care, what I learned there was that I do have choices. It's really, really interesting how often we try to have that protective factor of people, particularly those of what we call in a training I'm going to talk about in a little bit, those from hard places, is we tend to want to have this excessive protective factor about them and save or keep them safe from expectations of the world or challenges that the world's going to have. But in reality, the tool and the skill that we really need is equipping people with support, with skills, with resiliency in times of challenges or perseverance, so that when the challenging times happen, because inevitably they do for all of us, that they are equipped with the tools to make it. And that's what I remember in foster care the most, is for the first time, even though it was a very challenging environment and I came across some very unhealthy circumstances, I finally felt some power within me to have some choices. I wasn't being directed to confine myself from people or social life or things that I could control. I was finally able to manage some of what was in my control. So an example of that would be just participating in sports, deciding if I was going to have good grades or not. And it was very interesting how we identify people. And I remember this from the perspective of a kid, that I would be called a foster child. Now, whenever people say foster child, I have to wonder if the first instinct that we get is foster. And that stigma that is still socially there, that they're troubled kids or they have behavioral issues or something of that sort. And so that connotation, whenever I would be moved from one foster home to another, or whenever I would come to a new school, or somebody would introduce me as to why I had to leave that day for court, because that might sound a little tough on a paper too. Oh, this kid has court. In the lives of those who didn't know, there became that stereotype and that connotation, and also within me, that I had to challenge and say, no, I first am a person. I am a young girl, I am an individual, and I am valuable. The foster part is just that, a part of who I am. And it was the people in my life that so often I would maybe overlook or not notice at the time that kind of taught me that concept, even indirectly. So when there's a teacher who says to me every day, Amber, I am so glad to see you today. And it's genuine. It's not forced. It's not something I've asked for. They are genuinely excited to see me for my name and who I am before the rest of that day starts. That's pretty impactful. I remember going to church, and though I wasn't really a religious person or spiritual person, there was a reason I went to church. And I went to church as a foster child because every time I walked in that door, I remember people being excited to see me there. Now, I don't remember a lick of what they talked about, but I remember feeling as though I was valued, important, and wanted. And in our mental health, that is a huge component of our wholeness, so that we are more equipped to treat all those other aspects of us. that mental health and that value of who we are to the deepest core of our authenticity is so, so important. Even at those young age, in those vulnerable lives, that one person, even for those few moments, can make a really big impact. I remember my cooks giving me extra biscuits and gravy on Fridays, and I loved that in the morning. And whoa, biscuits and gravy, and then cinnamon rolls with chili. Okay, so maybe not everybody understands that lingo, but if you put them together, they're pretty amazing. And I learned that from people. But you know, I didn't just learn that they're great together. I learned that I could get extra. And when I could get extra because I was hungry, that said to me that they'll provide to my basic needs. And when my basic needs were met, those people taught me that you matter enough to give a little extra. They probably didn't intend that. I don't know that I knew I was seeking that, but that was being met in a very, very deep, deep way that encouraged me to, use those other skills of making choices, of getting help, of talking to people, to being authentic about the fact that I hated going to therapy because socially I was taught that it was abnormal or that I shouldn't, that social pressure, that it wasn't something I should do. And I remember eventually going into a long-term family that said, we want you as you, the 100% you, and how powerful that was to me in my life to have that committed statement. And it actually impacted me so much that even though I never wanted to go into social work, because I felt like social workers had, ruined my life as a child in foster care, I eventually did a career assessment and I realized that I couldn't be more passionate about a career than a career that helps those in need, helps those who may feel are not, but may feel helpless, may feel unworthy, may feel as though they need support. I want to be there to be that light in them. And it's amazing how sometimes what was once our weakness can be used in a healthy way as becoming our biggest strength. And I got to learn that in my process of social work and learning the profession and redefining what family was with the family that I came to live with when I was 16 years old, and how unconditional love is something that we all are worthy of and deserving of. And so that was something that profession taught me how child welfare is from the other perspective, from a professional. And then as a foster parent, and now as an adoptive parent, I've seen all sides of the spectrum. And I've got to see some of the most challenging struggles and emotional issues. And I have learned to have compassion for myself as well as those I work with. That doesn't mean there's not accountability. It doesn't mean there's not challenges. It doesn't mean it can't be tough, but it does mean that I can be compassionate and aware of those emotions. And so one of the coolest things that I got to do in the world of my own mental health, but also being able to use that knowledge and awareness and experience in foster care as a tool to expand the value of mental health and the wholeness of who we are and the joyous character that each of us bring to the table, is I got to go to a training and a certification through Texas. And so first of all, being in Texas, it is a big place and I totally loved it. Coming from Kansas, I really like to go see some new places, and I was really looking for cowboy hats and boots. Didn't see a whole lot because some of it's on Zoom, but I did get to experience a wonderful place of what we call TBRI curriculum. So TBRI is sponsored by the Texas Christian University, is how it's initiated. And it stands for Trust-Based Relational Interventions. I am now a practitioner in that course because I've completed the program. This program is absolutely amazing, and it talks about a wholeness in who we are and how important it is for the caregivers of those from, and this is where the word came from, hard places, how essential it is for us to know our attachment styles, our own things that need to be addressed or resolved, and how important our behaviors and interactions are with those we care about. See, this isn't something necessarily from their particular curriculum, but nowadays 65% or more of society functions under visual stimulation. They function off of what people do, what they see, way more than what they hear. And so the impact that you have of taking care of your mental health, taking care of your needs, acknowledging your struggles in healthy ways in your relationships is going to be way more impactful for the world around you and the people you serve than your words ever will be. Because that's 65% of the general population. Those from hard places, I suspect, is significantly higher. So let me tell you a little bit about this program. So TBRI, the Trust-Based Relational Intervention, was actually initiated by Dr. Karen Purvis. And she was an amazing doctor. She loved children. And the deepest core of what she talked about was the value and worth of every precious child. And she called them all precious. And it was such a beautiful the way her treatment ran. So she worked for the Institute of Child Development, and they had a lot of people with the perspective of both psychology, social work, child welfare, but of course in the neurological and the science. And so Texas Christian University helped her create the program Trust-Based Relational Intervention, which is attachment-based, it is a trauma-informed, and it is created to help the needs of vulnerable kids. What really talks about what we talk about in this program is these kind of core concepts. First of all, we want to empower the youth that we work with from hard places. The second is then we connect, and the third is then we correct. And so it's shifting that concept of parenting from correcting to instead empowering, and then connecting before we correct. So building that relationship. So empowering is meeting those physical needs, food, water, nutrition, sleep, maybe stimulation that the child needs. Connecting, that's talking about attachment and trust before giving direction. And then correcting is intended to disarm fear. And all of these components together is always with the core of connection. Because like I said in my story, in the story I think of probably everybody, but particularly when we talk about TBRI and people from hard places, the core of 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 needs is connection, relationships, healthy ones, feeling that value and worth within us. And so this curriculum, which teaches actually parents or caregivers some of these skills in the perspective of those from hard places, really emphasizes how to work with these kids, but also that mental health matters. Mental health matters in our families, in those we work with, and in the lives of kids from hard places, in the lives of foster kids like me. And so it's so great to be able to use the TBRI and implement it not only in my own family, because I do, but also in the children I work with at my school, that I'm the school social worker, in the mental health, and in a Successful Survivors Foundation, when we go out and we help people work with kids from hard places, or we help advocate for kids from hard places. It is a wonderful program that I highly recommend that you look into and implement into at least some aspects of your life. You don't have to do all of it to do some of it. You don't have to fix everything to help something. You don't have to change the world to make an impact. And all of that is so important. But all of that starts with you and that self-care and that self-management and that bravery to step out and get those supports so you can become the best versions of yourselves. I know that I am thankful for all of those who gave their time, their lives, and their interventions to help me from a child of abuse and neglect to a foster child to a hurting young adult to now, and hopefully, a healthy, growing advocate for trust-based relational interventions, for healing, and for appreciation of people around the world. Continue being the best versions of yourself, and thanks for all you do.
My name is Angela Williams, President and CEO of Easter Seals. With over 30 years of experience in nonprofit and corporate arenas, and having served on active duty in the United States Air Force, I further Easter Seals' mission to change the way the world defines and views disability, and to ensure our military veterans receive the supports they need when returning home. Easter Seals has been an invaluable resource for people with disabilities, veterans, and seniors, as well as their families, caregivers, and communities for more than 100 years. Our national network of affiliates delivers outcome-based services throughout the lifespan to more than 1.5 million people nationwide every year. Plus, we're a powerful advocate at the federal, state, and local levels for the 1 in 4 Americans living with disability. We've served transitioning military, veterans, and their families and caregivers since World War II, and continue to be the go-to partner on whom they can rely to ensure their successful transition into civil life. Our goal is to make sure people of all abilities live, learn, work, play, and act in their communities. We provide hands-on, comprehensive, vital programs and support to help people reach their full potential, including adult and senior services, autism services, medical rehabilitation, mental health services, and residential and housing services. We have programs designed to help children and adults learn and often relearn basic functions to help master skills needed to develop and thrive and be sharp and active across the lifespan. This includes an online development screening tool called Make the First 5 Count, assistive technology services, children's services, early intervention, child care, placement, and related services helping people prepare for the workforce. We make sure that everyone can play, have fun, and participate in their communities with healthy programs for children, adults, and caregivers to relax and connect with friends and engage in constructive activities like camp and recreation. We offer respite and support services as well. And we encourage everyone to act through community engagement and outreach, as well as educational programming. We engage in policy that supports our mission. In particular, we started the Black Child Fund to help end racial disparity in healthcare, childcare, and education faced by Black children early and throughout the lifespan. We've also been focusing a lot on mental health, especially during this pandemic, as we grapple with frightening statistics that reflect the challenges we're all facing as a result of the crisis due to the hardships many have experienced in the past year. At Easter Seals, we believe that when people receive the help they need and when they can live in the communities they want, their possibilities are limitless.
No, you can't understand what's going on with me. No, it doesn't make sense, but it's just how I